Hello, welcome. I'm delighted this evening to welcome Dame Harriet Walter to Mansfield College, actor, activist, and now curator of a remarkable collection of women's words in her book, She Speaks. So Harriet, thank you very much for being with us this evening. Many of you here I know will know Harriet or recognise her from screen roles, from Succession to Ted Lasso, Star Wars to Downton Abbey, and she was also the most deliciously vile Fanny Dashwood in the Ang Lee Sense and Sensibility. But Harriet has a particular affinity for Shakespeare, where she's played roles from Beatrice to Brutus and Portia to Prospero. And now, Harriet, you've written this wonderful book about, well, not this wonderful book, another wonderful book about playing Shakespeare's roles for women in Brutus and Other Heroines in 2016. But this wonderful book, She Speaks, is very different because you kind of entered the writing room with Shakespeare and have written some of the speeches that he might have given to some of his female characters. Well, maybe if he'd got inside their heads, we can talk about that. But it's an amazing bravura performance, which will be on sale afterwards outside. But apart from this famous line, in Romeo and Juliet, she speaks, when Romeo sees Juliet first on the balcony, what inspired you to write this?
I was challenged. I always respond to a challenge by a group called the Shakespeare Schools Foundation, or Shakespeare School Festival. They set up a sort of nationwide competition for schools and students to reimagine a character in Shakespeare or write a different take on a character in Shakespeare. And they just asked me to kick the competition off with an example. And I hadn't thought about it, but I realized that I'd always been a bit fed up that Gertrude doesn't get enough to say, and she doesn't get to fight back when Hamlet gives her a whole lot of, harangues her and says, how could you possibly love Claudius and you shouldn't even be fancying anybody at your stage of life, and you should sit in your rocking chair and shut up. And she doesn't say anything. And I'd played Ophelia and watched this from the wings and thought, just remind myself, never play Gertrude. And so I wrote Gertrude. I wrote a piece for Gertrude, and then I thought, I'm rather enjoying this, and wrote some more, and then some more, and then some more.
Yeah. In terms of all these women's voices that are lost or ignored or interrupted, Shakespeare writes a lot about disastrous things that happen to women. They're sent to nunneries, they die quite often, they're abandoned at the altar, they turn to stone, all these things, but not very much about the voices of them as it happens to them. And I just wondered about your trying to engage with that. Is that, as a feminist, is that something you felt it was important to engage with?
It's really difficult because I think he's unsurpassed in his understanding of human beings and human nature, and that includes women, men, and everything in between. He does understand us and write about us better than anybody, for me. And I love poetry, I love dramatic poetry, and I love the musicality of what he writes and the depth of what he writes. And so to have this person who matters so much to me but doesn't kind of really address a lot of 51% of the population's experience from a subjective point of view is very tantalizing. And I think if you play any Shakespeare roles, you start, after a while, you sort of get this illusion that you know him, and you're in this sort of one-sided relationship where you know him very well, but he doesn't know you, and never conceived of you playing the roles he wrote because they were written for boys. And what are you doing inhabiting these characters and asking these impertinent questions? But I think it's sort of it's difficult because he writes beautifully for women, and he cares about women, and he understands what we're going through in lots of ways. But the thrust of the story is male-centered. Yeah. And I think whether that was always the case, probably always is the case so far in history, that you know, where the drama lies, where the conflict lies, where the moral decisions lie, which make good drama, are with men, because women weren't running things, so their dilemmas and decisions were not considered universally important. And that is a frustration.
Yeah. Can I talk about one of those voices? You've kindly said you'll read from the book, and I've said the title, She Speaks, is what Romeo says when he first sees Juliet on the balcony. I think she only said, I, me, at that point. But anyway, but I mean, despite the other, you know, character who perhaps should be a huge character in this play is Lady Capulet, who was, you know, 13 when she got married. By the end of the play, she's the mother of a dead 13-year-old. She's had a dynastic marriage plan that's been foiled. And yet she gets hardly any lines. And I thought you might share with us some of your thoughts about her.
Yes, I mean, it's very well chronicled and noted that very few female characters in Shakespeare have a mother figure. I don't know why that is. Shakespeare writes a lot about the dynamics between fathers and daughters, and the question of ownership and handing your daughter over to the suitable husband who will then own her comes up a lot. And the rage and anger that Capulet feels is something that Shakespeare seems to inhabit quite deeply, whereas Lady Capulet, when her daughter dies, says, "Oh me, this sight of death is as a bell that warns my old age to a sepulchre." That's all she says. And if she did have an aria, then it would be inappropriate. It's not the time, you know. So you try to insert the woman into the play, and you realise you have to give in that that's not the thrust of the story, and so she has to remain silent. But I love this my old age. I mean, if she was 13 when Juliet was born, she's you know, she's not yet 30, or she, you know. Anyway, so that in itself is very tragic. But you know, I thought, well, Shakespeare knows what it's like to lose a child, and why isn't he writing that? He's a great dramatist. He puts that into King John. He has a wonderful sequence that Constance has the stage to, you know, she takes over the scene, you know, in her grief for her son Arthur. But he's a dramatist. He knows where the thrust of the story's going, and it ain't with her. Yeah. So you just have to...
However, she does have a great story, which I think you write really well. So
well, she does say to the nurse, you know, I was that age when I got married. So we know she got married very young. And we know that in those days, it was fairly normal for a girl to be married off very young. So this is what I've given her to say. I don't have many words, am seldom seen, and yet I am the centre of my play. I too was made to marry at 13, forced into motherhood without delay. Old Capulet, he couldn't wait to start, so I was ploughed and plundered, split and torn, my fragile frame untimely ripped apart, and thus my lovely Juliet was born. So weak and frail myself could make no milk, past mewling infant into nurse's care, my aching body laced once more in silk and whalebone ribs, suppressing my despair. I bore her, but could never feed or own her, from unfamiliar babe was kept away, led by my lord through houses of Verona as trophy bride and mother on display. With time, I learnt to escape with loosened laces to watch my signet daughter grow in beauty. Sweet gossiping in nursery oasis was wondrous rare relief from wifely duty. Too quick my Juliet grew to nubile age. Preemptively my sister friendship froze. I shut my daughter out and closed a page and found a fitting prince to pluck my rose. I had no choice. I knew of nothing other, only the rules and duties of an heiress. From me to Juliet passed as from my mother. At least I thought she'll always have her Paris. But now she'll never more come back to me. too high a price for laying down of swords. Two mothers, both alike in agony, embrace cold stone, too late, too deep for words. And then my goddaughter's done a little picture.
I think that's an incredibly moving poem. One of the things I mentioned to you when we were speaking outside is that Dame Maggie Smith came to speak here before my time, and I gather berated my predecessor for building this lecture theatre on the site of the Rose Garden where she had first played Juliet as a teenager. So I thought you might read a bit of a stage direction, page 201, when you talk about what the nurse said about pointing out this speech from the balcony, just sort of
okay, is this just the nurse? I see why Mr. Shakespeare took this story to show the healing power of lovers' alchemy. Two stars forever staged in tragic glory, although he never specified a balcony.
So one of the things that you play a lot with in your book is the gender fluid aspect of Shakespeare, because of course these parts were played by boys. I wonder if you might say something about how this informed your thought about it and your writing.
Yes, it's just this as I said, when you're playing any playwright, you're sort of getting inside their head in a funny way. You're speaking their words and embodying characters that they've imagined. And it always feels a bit strange, as though you're in some way trespassing, because he didn't write the parts for women. He was writing about a female character, but he wasn't writing to the talents of a woman. And he very much wrote to the talents of the company he'd assembled, or somebody else had assembled, but they were the company, the Chamberlain's men or the King's men. They were the people, they were the raw materials he had to work with. And I don't think it's me inventing this, but there must have been a fantastic young boy. I mean, there were probably several, but there was one particular star player. And we all know young people can act beautifully. You don't, sadly, it doesn't matter how mature you are, how much training you've had, a young person can act you off the stage because they've just got this instinctive, wonderful talent. And you get the sense, particularly in As You Like It, which I've just been in, you get the sense in all the stuff between Orlando and Rosalind, and in the epilogue that Rosalind speaks, that this character that was created because of the actor playing him. I think Shakespeare just took off. His imagination was fired by this person who I imagine was sort of equally attractive to men and women. Was on that cusp where everybody could fall in love with him, and that has been a great gift to women actors subsequently, because I sort of wonder if he had been writing for women, he might have written much tamer, more decorous characters, to please the public or to not shock the public or whatever, because he was very conscious of the public, and he could get away with writing very feisty women because they were played by boys somehow. I just feel that we owe them a debt, these
So
boys.
that's really interesting, because one of the things I'd wondered as a sort of apology for Shakespeare's rather limited lines for women was that maybe he thought these are the kind of the novice actors, we've got to let them, you can't expect them to do too much, they're learning their craft.
Well, I think they had the energy and they could have done it, but I think once they got better and better, they were in apprenticeship for 7 years, and once they got very good at it, they moved on to play, and they were 17, 18 and whatever, so when they were in their early and mid-20s, they were playing Romeo, not Juliet. And I don't know, we can only speculate.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, I remember once a performance of Rosalind by Adrian Lester and A Cheat by Jowl, an all-male production, and I was saying earlier that one of the things that it really taught me about gender politics is here is this beautiful tall man in a scene where he's pretending to be, well, he's a beautiful tall man playing a woman who has dressed up as a man to protect his sister and is in the forest saying, please, could you give my sister and me a bed for the night? And the reason you knew Adrian Lester, who's tall and male and has a male voice, the reason you knew he was a woman pretending to be a man was because he was smiling too much. He was saying, hi, I really wondered if you could possibly give my sister a bed for the night. It'd be really kind of you. I thought, men don't talk like that.
That's
like,
interesting.
So, you know,
and we had to do the other thing when we did an all-female trilogy with the Donmar, and we went the other way. We had to sort of not apologize. We had to learn not to apologise. We had to learn not to wave our arms around because we weren't sure that people understood what we meant. And, you know, basically we had to unlearn a lot of behaviour, and that was really interesting to go the other way.
Sounds fantastic. I wondered if you might read your speech that you wrote for the boy player who plays Rosalind on page 24.
Yes. He said 'twas not the fashion for a girl to speak the epilogue or lead the play. Adhering to the mores of his world, the women in his plays had less to say. But showman Will knew how to tantalize and satisfy a certain urge in us. If boys play girls, he thought, why not devise some leading roles that are androgynous? One sweet young coddling player then was ripe to flaunt his talent and was up to speed on how to use his wit and reedy pipe. He was the perfect gamine Ganymede. I was that boy, apprenticed to my seniors, who taught me all I knew of thespian tricks. But once mature, there followed many lean years, and my career was through at 26. But I can always say with deepest pride, Will wrote those roles for me. I paved the way. By sheer mimetic skill, I turned the tide, so all you girls can play the roles today.
You were talking about how this book was, for you, a way of exploring the interior life of people who obviously do, or characters in the plays who do have an interior life that maybe isn't talked about so much in the play. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Well, yes, I started out with characters I played. I mean, although I'd never played Gertrude, I had played Ophelia and watched her from the wings, and I knew the play inside out. So I started off with characters that I pretty much knew the plot, knew what was going on, and had a theory about what they were thinking. And certainly with Lady Macbeth, I'd played her for a year, and I knew exactly what I wanted to say and just said it. But there were a lot of parts that I thought, I've been sitting in the audience wondering what the hell is going on in your mind, and I've never played you. And they were much harder to do, because in a way, I've only learnt anything about any of these characters or these plays by inhabiting them. And if you're sort of not inhabiting them, but watching and projecting things onto them that you'd like them to say, it's very different. And so I'm quite unsatisfied by some of these, because it was like going at a wall and being beaten back all the time, trying to climb up and being beaten back. But I learnt something out of exploring all of them. Yeah. And sometimes I just ended up saying what I wanted to say, never mind what the character wanted to say, because I didn't understand them. You know, I didn't understand why Lady Anne would fall for Richard III. I didn't understand why, you know, so I just sort of made it up. Yeah. So this is what I would think if I was you. You know?
And one of the amazing poems in this book, or speeches, verse speeches, is one that you imagine for Caliban, who's one of the most kind of objectified characters, really, in a Shakespeare play. And I wonder why you wrote for Caliban. And
yes, I don't know. I just felt, perhaps because we'd done The Tempest with all women, I saw those characters as sort of not gender specific. And, you know, you're on this island where you can reinvent everything, you know, and so Caliban became somebody I really wanted to explore. And they have been interpreted in so many ways. And I just wanted to get inside their head, really, in some way, rather than project anything onto him. It's not particularly, as I said, it was frustrating because it didn't reveal any truth. it just made me, well, it did in a way, it made me think of Shylock as well, and people who are treated badly in plays, and how Shakespeare seems to understand them in a certain way and always gives them a little window where they can express something. And Caliban famously has his "Be not afeard, the isle is full of noises," that speech. So, ugly muggly, never cuddly, I blot the page with rot and rage, I welcome stones that hurt my bones, jagged boulders, buckled shoulders, engendered in a dog-pissed ditch, ungendered offspring of a witch, nor fish, nor filly, cock, nor colt, spat from the womb to cause revolt. Unholy mix of scales and feathers, I look for mates, but no others, no name to call me who I am, till he came up with Caliban, banned from humanity, but by him tamed, tutored, and tortured with the self-same hand, wrangled with whips. But what's the carrot? This barren bogland to inherit? Will books and language set me free? No, monster, always let me be. In slop-pale slurry let me lie, Pygmalion alien in my sty. I'll pester blessed Miranda with my stench. If you invent me, shall I not revenge? You taught me words, so I shall spit and spout, delight in dancing all the poison out. Stamping, stomping, rudely romping, ban, Caliban, I sicken, Sycorax, Prospero, Impostero. You set the spirit free, while I am bound forever in my cave, or so you thought. But in my ear, sweet noises softly sound, a music no magician ever taught. Beyond, above, below, and everywhere, the buzz of wings and zephyrs in the air lulls me to sleep when no one reaches me, and in that sleep, how lovely I can be. We set it in a prison, so I just had that feeling of, people who are cast as bad people, and in their private sleep they can dream of being a better person. Or, I don't know, it just sort of, that's why I included Caliban somehow. Yeah. He belonged there somehow.
You've talked a lot about Gertrude. I mean, were these writings that you designed to be speeches in, what an actor would have performed if there'd been a Hamlet 2 that was, Gertrude's story, or,
I don't know. People would say, well, why don't you put them in the play? I don't think any of them really would work, for the reasons I've said. They're not, they don't kind of belong in the flow of the play. The only one I would say you could perhaps substitute, or if you really wanted to be daring, you could put Kate's speech in, I suppose, at the end of Taming of the Shrew. Yes. But you could also put, you could have Olivia. That would twist things round, because I put Olivia in Twelfth Night. I thought, because there's no woman-to-woman love affair in Shakespeare, but there's lots of man-to-man love affairs in Shakespeare. I thought, instead of the titillation the audience would feel about a boy dressed as a girl dressed as a boy falling in love with a boy dressed as a girl, we could change it completely the other way and have a girl falling in love with a girl and realising she was falling in love with a girl. And I thought that would be an interesting twist that Shakespeare wouldn't probably mind.
Yes, and you've played Olivia and Viola, haven't you? Both sides of that.
Yes. So kind of, I've been on the receiving end and the giving end of that relationship. Yes.
I mean, it is very implausible that Viola is a boy who looks exactly like her brother.
Yeah, I know.
But, so I wonder if you might read us that one, actually, page 168.
I have actually seen recently a woman playing both Sebastian and Viola. So, and then you go, well, why? Then what do you do at the end? And they both come on stage together. So this, no prizes for lots of borrowing of, if anyone knows I left no ring with her, then they'll see the echoes here. I borrowed you know, from Shakespeare quite a lot. His stance so bold, and yet his voice so light, just on the cusp of manhood, perfect place, that fine hiatus in a person's growing before maturity secures their fate. Her accents soft, her words poetic scorn. Did I say her? How now, what says my heart? Those blushing, peach-skinned cheeks, more like mine own than my dead brother's lately furrowed chin. Indifferent ruby lips gave her away. A sister servant to that loathed lord, a sister suitor from Orsino's court. Good madam, let me see your face. So sudden a command, such barefaced, brazen. She had no business with my face, did she? It was no part of the Duke's embassy. But curiosity beyond her brief made her discover what he doted on. That transitory rapture she betrayed on seeing my eyes unveiled, I noted then the daylight shines on mine that shadows hers. What means this sadness? Why, she loves him, sure. Her boyish suits forbid her to declare her passion, so she practices on me. How will this fadge? My father had a daughter, loved a girl. It cannot be. I rave, beat back my thoughts. Even so quickly may one catch the plague, a playful ache to love so hopelessly. Or let my pulse rush freely for this swain, pursue the wayward love I dare not name. Concealment is the food of love. Play on. I'll hang on every word Cesario says, though all the world should think I am a lad. Let be. Malvolio, I have a job for you.
Another fascinating thing about this book is that you concentrate quite a lot on speeches for people who don't have much to say, rather than those that do. You have a hero, not a Beatrice, Charmian as well as Cleopatra. What is it about those voices of the voiceless that interested you?
Well, because, you know, everybody's the centre of their life, you know, and if you're playing those parts, you've worked out what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and you're just not given the words to express it. And particularly those characters that are objects, and very much, you know, he does, you know, use characters, you know, and male characters are there just for the plot, you know, and but you've got to inhabit them if you're doing the play for a year or whatever it is. You've got to find your path through them, and you have to be the subject that other people are objectifying, and that's an exercise that many female actors are very used to. that isn't always the case for men, but yeah, a hero is there. You know, the substance of hero isn't explored, and the substance I write about Octavia and Antony and Cleopatra, who historically was a fabulous woman, you know, but it didn't suit the plot to explore that. So you know, you take it. That's the way plays work. Not every character can be the centre of the play, but I just wanted to hear what they were thinking when they were standing there on stage.
We might have time. I wonder whether you might read one of those. I mean, Charmian or Octavia. I don't know which one.
Yeah, I might read Hero, because
yes, it's on,
yeah,
it's on page 60.
60. I should know the way around my own book, but 60. Yeah. To me, my name is willful irony, for I am not the hero of the play. I just accept what others pile on me, the cause of, not the agent, in the fray. My poor relation, Beatrice, has more fun. She's subplot, yet she gets to mock and move with many an observation, quip and pun. while I stand by the pretty po-faced Juve, the bride-to-be, the object of all eyes, and object is the operative word. Claudio considers me his prize, a virtuous icon to be seen, not heard. I have a scene or two, I do admit, where I can show some bright prenuptial spark. Alone with women folk I find my wit, queen of the boudoir, there I make my mark. But with no mother to confide in me, 'tis father's cronies I must move among. They seldom see that other side of me, for something in their presence ties my tongue. You see, I'm trying to grasp how slander vile and accusation paper-thin and proofless could turn a father's lifelong love to bile, make him a stranger to me, cruel and ruthless. A badly acted shadow pantomime was all it took to make him lose his faith. A dumb show made him wish me dead, so I'm requiting him by staging my own death. Now cousin Beatrice tests her Benedict. Of course she's innocent. You've all been conned. You can't love both of us, so take your pick. Kill Claudio and break the macho bond. It never came to that, I'm glad to say, however much I loathe the snivelling swine. He's feeling guilty now and kneels to pray, exchanges pedestal for empty shrine. He loves me now I'm dead, but quickly switches when he espies my double. Duh, it's me. Again, it is my image that bewitches. Can this one work? I'll have to wait and see. So this is how a misnamed girl called Hero learned quickly how man's love can turn to doubt. A faultless girl can fall so fast to zero, a nothing that there's much ado about.
I've got so many favourites in this book, but one of them was one of the two sonnets that you imagined for the Dark Lady. And of course, there's endless speculation. Was she a man? Was she a woman who didn't fit the norms of fair beauty? Was she black? But what I love is what she might say if she was speaking rather than Shakespeare speaking for her. What made you write? You wrote two on this one.
Yeah, the first one came very quickly. I don't know why. I was just thinking of the objects of Shakespeare's love, really, and who he loved. And I also wrote some for Anne Hathaway, because I think, the women in his real life became as interesting to me as the ones he made up. And yeah, again, we'll never know. This is the frustration. We know so much about people now that we don't care about. Everybody's recorded their life, and there's Shakespeare, and we don't know enough about him. Shall I read? Which sonnet shall I read?
Well, I had 162 marked, but you could read them both if you wanted.
Okay, I'll try it out. Yeah, it's called My Word Against Yours. Who will believe my verse in time to come, if that my words are ever pressed in print? Your stronger voice will always strike mine dumb, my thoughts to powder rendered by your flint. Who will believe my birth on Shadwell's bank, when you have sailed me in from Afric's shore? My unknown father of the lowest rank, erased by fables of a towering Moor. Ashamed to love a low-born of my race, you colour me with false exotic hues. But 'tis your shame that shames you, not my face, despite your weighty talent to amuse. Thus I who never lived in foreign climes must lie forever in your deathless rhymes. Yeah, I have borrowed quite a lot from William,
Shakespeare did it too, it's all right. You were talking about the roles you played in the series of Philida Lloyd productions, which were all female productions, and you played Brutus and you played Prospero.
Yeah.
What did you learn from playing those men's parts, as it were?
Oh, gosh. I just learnt the journey was quite interesting because we started off with this sort of slightly iconoclastic. We're going to break into male territory and we're going to get shit for it, which we did right at the beginning, and then we built on that, and then it became perfectly normal for me to play the King of England, and then and then we moved on into the third part of the trilogy, by which time we'd been involved with lots of prisons. We'd worked with prisons and prisoners and learnt a lot about the role play within prisons and the sort of gender fluidity within a prison. And when I came to play Prospero, I wasn't playing a man, but I wasn't playing a woman. I was just me. And I realized that how much, you know, without getting too personal, how much my own interior doesn't feel gendered. You know, my experience is female. I've lived life as a woman, so I've had an experience of being a female. But my mentality, my sense of who I am when I wake up in the morning is neither one nor the other. It's, you know, it's slippery and fluid. And that was really what I learned, was I didn't have to posture as a man anymore. I just had to say the lines, believe in the situation, believe the person, feel their passions, and that Shakespeare allows you to do that. Because although, of course, there's one aspect, if you want to emphasize it, of the play that is about hierarchy and colonialism and, you know, restoring male order at the end of the play and all those things, we rather de-emphasize that in favor of some other threads through the play, which were to do with freedom, forgiveness, letting go, and what power was, and how power, giving up power meant, you know, recognizing your mortality. And there were just lots of quite profound themes in the play that took over more than, you know, I'm going to go back to Naples and reclaim my land and my daughter's going to become the Queen of Naples. That just didn't seem to be very interesting. But unfortunately, that's what Shakespeare's written. But, you know, it just, you know, all productions emphasize a slightly different aspect of the play. And that was what that journey took me on. It was just a sort of recognition that that we all had this subjective life that, you know, as actors, you know, the other people in the company were of every single different background, you know, training, proclivities, ethnic groups. You know, we were just a very mixed group, and that we were all able to relate to the main themes of this play, and that in itself felt like a big achievement, you know.
And you said that your favourite, or maybe one of your favourite poems in this book was the one you wrote for Ariel. So I just wondered if you wanted to talk about Ariel and freedom and why it was that.
It's one of those nice things when you write something, you set out to write one thing and it takes you in another direction. And I wanted to write about Ariel, the spirit, and all of that, and it just became about acting.
Yeah.
It became, and not just acting, but what we all do, and how it's just very rare that the writing takes over and tells you something you didn't think you were aiming for, and that's why I like it best, because I had least control over it. It just sort of came out. But again, it doesn't, you know, it's not a substitute for, you know, people will go on playing that play with that character in that way. You can't really make a dent in the way Shakespeare's going to be played in the future. You know, you can only have your own response to it and see if it inspires anybody else, you know.
And Harriet says in the book, it's one of the things about theatre as an art is it's the ultimate, you had to be there.
Yeah,
you're there, but you're not. So,
and we have no control over how things are going to be interpreted in the future. So.
Yeah, yes. I wondered if you might want to, I do want to leave some time for everyone else to ask some questions, but I wondered if you might want to read that Ariel poem.
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, this is, again, it's a sonnet. I rather enjoyed the sonnet form, the strict sonnet form. It felt quite nice to have that discipline. Much as an actor hides behind a role, avoiding capture, so I shift my shape, a paradox who's never truly whole, belonging nowhere, longing to escape. I wear a coat of other people's skins, clap on the helmet of my master's thoughts, not sure where his path ends or mine begins, an aerial pet performing somersaults. I zip around the island, flame the sea, dive deep inside the core of spinning earth, paint music in the air where thought is free. But love doth make me ask, what's freedom worth? Unchained from him who loves me, I do fear that loosed to viewless winds, I'll disappear. And it's just that idea that, it did teach me something about how we all think we want to be free, and in relationships, oh, leave me alone, I want to be free. But we do need to we do need to belong and own, and this is the negotiation we have to work out as we go along to give people their freedom, but also feel attached. Because if you're not attached, who are you? And I think actors feel that, if I haven't got a role, if I'm not cast in anything, who am I? We sit at home and wait for the phone to ring, so, metaphorically.
Or write amazing books. And you're never waiting for the phone to ring, you still write the books. Right, I'm going to open up, if you would like to ask a question, we've got some time, but please wait for a microphone. Who's going to start off? I see a hand here. Sorry, microphone's just coming.
Hi, thank you so much for your great work. I was so intrigued about the anachronisms of your writing, the way you seem to want to position yourself both in, in Shakespeare's time and in your own time. And I was wondering if you place yourself in different times, in what time do you exist when you write these compared to, for example, when you're acting a part in Shakespeare?
I don't think it's very different from acting, because I think you're playing somebody in another century whose story is bound by things that happen in that century, and you can't go too far outside of them, or you're bound by the director's concept or whatever. But you're still you living and breathing right now, this minute. And so that to me is the paradox, is that when we exist right now, but at the same time we're telling stories from other times. And there's something about that I've always found fascinating. I talk about becoming a hybrid, that you merge a bit. And so some of the language that I use is quite modern. But then some of it jumped out, and I thought, no, that doesn't sound right. One of the ones I liked writing was Isabella in Measure for Measure, because I was talking about the soliloquy and how, the paradox of her being in her situation and believing in it and having to commit to it, and saying, can you help me, audience? Please help me, And the audience are sitting there going, I'd love to, but we're in different realities, I can't really, And I love playing with that I love playing with the difference between these different times, but the interesting thing is that it's happening now in some way.
There's a hand here, and then here.
Thank you. I enjoyed you so much in As You Like It this summer, and clearly you were playing a role written as a male character, and all the other members of the cast were referring to you as they when you played Jacques, and I wondered how that sort of changed your thinking about gender and gender fluidity in Shakespeare.
It felt like a fairly natural evolution after playing Prospero, funnily enough, after that discovery. But because it's such a well-known part and such a well-known play, I had to keep hitting myself saying, it's not a man, it's not a man, you're not a man. So because he's so well-known, and it was great when the rest of the company projected that onto the character and were very sort of disciplined in calling them they. And there was at one point, there was the very first speech that they made, said, she's like, and one of the other characters said, they. And then it became, they took that prop away and said, we don't need it. And it just became more and more irrelevant, really. And that's really how I felt. I thought, I'm saying these universal words, all the world's a stage. But it's very, very strange to say all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. One man in his time that plays many parts, then goes on to talk about all the men in the world, and that felt really odd. But what can you do? It's one of the most famous speeches in the world, so you can't change it.
Right, another one. Yes.
Oh, yes, thank you so much for all you shared. I would like to go back to the Villa de Lloyd trilogy, if I may, because I remember seeing the Julius Caesar and just being, one, actually slipping into that mode of just being really excited to see women playing those male roles and speaking those amazing words. But I'm also just interested because you talked about how the themes of the play came to be, or those in those three plays came to be predominant rather than the idea of men playing women or women playing men. But also just wondered about the framing, the prison framing, and how that might have affected the way you played the characters. Because for me, I'll just share that the ending of Julius Caesar, I was blown away by the fact that your character's left on stage and what is happening in terms of the slippage between Shakespeare's play, the framing that you've got, that those actors in the prison were playing those characters. I'm sorry that's a bit long-winded, but it was such a powerful moment, and I wonder if you could say a bit about that slippage in those roles.
It's interesting because one of the quite well-established things is doing Shakespeare in prisons. It's been set up, it's been happening for a long time, and the connection that people in that extreme situation, or having had very extreme lives, the way they can more easily relate to some of Shakespeare's themes than the man in the street. And, you know, because they've actually witnessed murder or been in an abusive relationship with it or whatever, you know, they've actually experienced it and can relate to it. And I just, you know, for me, it's all about the words, you know, I think anybody of any gender can say these words, rather I equate it with being able to play a piano concerto. You know, we don't care, if you're listening to a recording of Mozart piano concerto, you don't know if it's a man or a woman. It's the person who's able to bring all those notes to your ears, you know. And so that's the way I see the job of playing Shakespeare. But of course, you are standing up in reality, being seen as a woman or man by an audience quite often. People talked in the Shakespeare trilogy that we did, they said that they very quickly forgot whether we were men or women, and that in a way that's great because the actual play came through in a way that you know, perhaps people get muddled up in, you know, I don't know, I wasn't watching.
Yeah. I was thinking about the framing that you guys were also prisoners, and that ending when you were taken off by the guards, how that affected the way that you thought about the play, the character, and that breaking of that moment of being your character.
Well, it had many layers because at first we put it in a prison partly because in, believe it or not, 2012 doesn't seem that far long ago. We were up against it. We were up against the male critics, male actors. There were a lot of people quite hostile about it to begin with. And somehow putting it in a prison justified the experiment, if you so term, you know, because, or, you know, we could have put it in a girls' school or something, you know, where, you know, girls get to play boys because there aren't any boys around. But then it became more than a cover story. It became more than an excuse. It became a whole layer in itself about, you know, a metaphor for women being powerless and at the bottom of the pile. you know, not having access to things, but having all the same thoughts as anybody else, but not being able to express them. And yeah, so it just sort of developed into that, a bigger thing, really. Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, there's one just here.
Who's been the most interesting woman that you've written about in your book, and why?
I couldn't hear that very well.
Who's been the most interesting woman you've written about in your book, and why?
The most interesting woman I've written about in my book, and why? Partly, it's the difficult ones, like Lady Anne in Richard III. Just, it's those people who are still eluding me. You know, why did they do what they did? It's so sort of personal. It's so, not everybody would have behaved like that. It's so full of chemistry that what I talk about is that scenes, when you get them up on their feet, they make sense because of the chemistry between the actors, which you can't, when you're reading it and studying it, it doesn't make any sense at all. But if you cast it right, you go, oh my God, you know, human beings are irrational, they fall for the wrong person, they feel drawn towards people they hate, and it suddenly becomes erotic, and, you know, all those mysterious things that we don't control and we don't understand became the most interesting things to write about. But the trouble is they remain a bit of a mystery, so I didn't crack it. I didn't crack any of them, but that's one of the most interesting ones, I think, for me. I don't really know.
They're all interesting. Have you got any more? Oh yes, it's just here. Thank you.
In a similar vein, are there any particular performances you've seen where a female character has been embodied in a certain way that has inspired some of the writing that you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say it's probably a rather boring answer, but I've seen a Gertrude played in such a way that it inspired the poem, because I thought, I understand her now because of the choices that actress made. But again, you do one performance like that, and then the next time you see it, they're playing it how they usually play it. Do you know what I mean? It's very frustrating. You make a breakthrough, but it doesn't kind of add up to, oh, we're all going to play it differently from now on. But she made me understand the character of Gertrude in a certain way, but you have to, but always you have to come back to what did Shakespeare mean? You know, it's all very well you see Catherine Tamar the Shrew, you think, oh, that actress got a good line on it. You know, she was very sarcastic and you didn't believe that she had really succumbed at the end, and what a good idea. But then you think, but what did Shakespeare mean? He probably meant she was going to succumb and she was tamed, and we don't know what he felt about that. And so you have to sort of be true to the origins of it while you explore. It's frustrating, but...
Except one of the things that's really fascinating about Shakespeare is, yes, he kind of ends up siding with the victims, but he does get under the skin of the person who's completely other, the Shylock or whoever. And just when you were talking about Gertrude, it made me think, you know, I've been there when she says, Hamlet, you know, no, you're not me, and he says, yes, you're my father's brother's wife, and would it were not so, you are my mother. And you think, okay, so you're somebody's wife and you're somebody's mother, but you're not, you know, do you not know me?
Yeah, that's
no,
exactly
I don't.
right.
Yeah, she says so. I don't.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
So.
And I wrote a bit for Portia in Julius Caesar, because she does her whole speech to Brutus is all about, you know, am I your wife, or am I your whore, or am I, you know, it's all to do with what I am to you, and my father was so and so, and you're so and so. I'm, it's all about her relationship to the man. I think that's the key. That's the key thing, really, in all of this, and in you know, every story we seem to have told until the middle of the last century was, you know, the women were there because they were somebody's mother, daughter, wife, or sister, and that's why they're in the story. And very few occasions are they just a person, which was what was the great, wonderful breakthrough in playing all these, because what happens as well is, you know, if you've got 3 women on stage, which is probably the maximum in a Shakespeare play, you say, oh, she's the comedy one, she's the put-upon one, and she's the dominant one, you know, or whatever. But if you've got 12 women on stage, you can't do that. You go, ooh, you mean there are all those different types of women? My God. Oh, that's confused me. I can't quite handle that. So that in itself is quite a challenge to some people.
Yeah. Okay, I see one hand here, and then I'm going to draw it closer. Yes. I think microphones are coming from every direction.
Do you feel that it's easier to introduce that degree of gender fluidity into Shakespeare because of the boy actors of the time, and perhaps the distance from our present day, or would you envisage that the same principle could be applied to modern theatre?
That's a very good question, because I have thought about that a lot. I think it's partly the nature of Shakespeare's writing that it's not naturalistic, and therefore it's not, paradoxically, it's not tied to the people who play it don't have to be who they're playing, if you see what I mean. Whereas now, because we have TV and a lot of very naturalistic expectations of, you know, that character couldn't possibly be that person. But, you know, with Shakespeare, you can change the age, the race, the gender, you know, because what's essential about it is the language and the humanity. The language, essentially, is what dictates any production. And it's very hard to explain that, because it's like a sort of, it's such a given that it's hard to imagine what it would be like without. But if you think of a Pinter play, if you think of trying to change the gender in a Pinter play, you could do it in order to make a point, but, you know, he objectifies a lot of women in his plays, and, you know, you'd have to, you know, it would be a very good exercise, actually, to have a man play the woman in The Homecoming, for instance, and for them to undergo that experience of being talked about and talked into, and thinking all your own thoughts. It would be a very good, I think it would be a very good lesson, very good therapy for them.
Is it perhaps easier as well because there have been such a myriad of productions over the centuries that all with a different take?
Yeah, I think we have more permission to do all sorts of things with Shakespeare, because he's going to survive whatever we do. You know, we can do him upside down, hanging from the ceiling. You know, we can shorten him, lengthen him, do him on a submarine. It doesn't really, you know, he'll still carry on. You know, the truth will out. You know, so it doesn't really. I think we do feel more permission to experiment, but I think it's just more to do with, have you got the ability to play the music? And if you've got the ability to play the music, I don't care who you are.
Okay, now, I really mean this is a wonderful book. If you're a Mansfield student, there's a copy in the library. Otherwise, you have the opportunity to buy one now from Harriet. Before I just close and thank her for this fantastic talk, I want to just tell you what's happening next week, because all you literature and feminist takes on literature keen people will want to know that next week we've got Professor Ros Ballister, who's the Vice Principal here, and she's going to be talking about Jane Austen's Fashion Bible. What Ros doesn't know about Jane Austen isn't worth knowing, and the pictures are really nice, so do come along, 5:30 next Friday. But in the meantime, I'd like to say thank you, Harriet, for sharing those voices, and yours with us. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.